Our first question is, do you think tourism is a big contributor to Melbourne's economy?
Yes, it is. Well, you came down to watch the sport. A lot of people come for sporting-related tourism, and also the culture of Melbourne's becoming well known as a cosmopolitan destination, and Melbourne's becoming known as an international city. So we've got slightly different things to attract tourists to what you guys have up on the Sunshine Coast, obviously. But tourism's definitely a big part of Victoria's economy.
Where do you think the majority of Melbourne's wealth comes from?
Majority of Melbourne's wealth? That's a good question. Well, some of it's intergenerational wealth. So Melbourne's been built over the last 200 years. Fortunes were made during that time, that have been gold or property development or agriculture. These days, still property development's a major component. I guess the increase in values of property over that time's been a big contributor to wealth, and other business. So in Victoria, manufacturing's always been a major industry as well. So the major industries probably are around manufacturing, health, education, what else would be retail services, and that type of thing. So, yeah.
What are the top 3 events or attractions that bring the most money into Melbourne?
Most money. Top 3 events or attractions?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Well, we have the Grand Prix here each year, and that's a major event. And the government pays a huge amount of money to secure that event each year because of the multiplier effect that has on our restaurants and our hotels and all that sort of thing. So probably the Grand Prix, our grand final, the AFL grand final is a huge one. Other events are there. I guess our Boxing Day Test match is always a big one here, and then we have lots of other carnivals and all that sort of thing. So.
How important is tourism for a small business?
Really depends on what the small business does and its main, what its main source of business is. But look, I think every economy is a sum of the parts, and also there's like multiplier effects throughout different economies. So going back to using the Grand Prix as an example, if you just look at the ticket sales, the Grand Prix loses $50 million a year or something like that. But if you actually look at the multiplier effects that has on taxis, on accommodation, on restaurants, on all sorts of, on retail, on all sorts of associated industries, it has a big impact and it has a big multiplier effect. But it really depends on how much that particular business is impacted by tourism. So certainly, if you're on the coast or if you're a restaurant, that relies on those sorts of industries or accommodation provider or anything that benefits from tourism, has a major impact.
Has the recession affected tourism at all?
Yes, it definitely has. The recession, we haven't probably had a recession since 2007 technically, but there's, in my view, is that the economy has slowed definitely since that time. things that impact on tourism, are obviously people's ability to afford to travel. Things like the Australian dollar, things like terrorism events and all those sorts of things impact that. But look, the recession or people's lowering affordability and their increased levels of debt have probably meant they're having to service more debt, pay more interest, which means naturally they have less money available to go on holidays and things like that.
Don't know if you agree, but what's this?
Page.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Next question is, we are looking at the diversity of Melbourne's tourism in the terms of the budget range. Do you feel Melbourne is more suited for luxury tourism, backpackers, families, or just a big mix of everyone?
Oh, look, I think Melbourne can provide a really good mix, but Melbourne is an expensive town, and Australia is an expensive country. So I'd probably say more suited to the middle and higher end. But we do, we've got a number of backpackers and that sort of thing, and I think a lot of people use Melbourne or Sydney as a base for their travels. But yeah, living in Melbourne is not a cheap place anymore, unfortunately.
And the final question that we have is, do you feel Melbourne caters for tourists with all different budgets?
Yeah, look, I think it does, but we now have, we were talking about affordability before. You have a minimum level that you just can't go below. So, there are some countries and some regions that have much cheaper costs of living, much cheaper accommodation, or a much lower standard of living, which means it's much easier to accommodate, I guess, a cheaper form of tourism. So you guys would know you can go to Bali and have a really great time for not a lot of money. Australia is becoming known as an expensive place to buy anything. So I'd have to say it does its best, but it probably struggles a little bit. And a lot of Melbourne's tourism is based on cultural elements, and some of those cultural and sporting elements can be more expensive to attend.
Well, I just say thank you very, very much for letting us come and interview you. It's been really a real experience. Yeah.
No problems whatsoever.
So that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, you can turn the camera off now.